For nearly 15 years, Michael Turner had called the quiet cul-de-sac on Maple Ridge Drive his sanctuary. After retiring from 22 years in the U.S. Air Force, he wanted nothing more than to live a simple, steady life, gardening in the mornings, tinkering in his garage in the afternoons, and sitting on his porch with a cup of black coffee as the Arizona sun set behind the mountains. His house wasn't extravagant, but it was his. Every corner of the property reflected his hard work and discipline: fresh paint, trimmed hedges, and a flagpole that stood proudly near the front walk. The neighborhood was governed by the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, an organization Michael had initially viewed as a harmless bureaucratic formality. He paid his dues on time, attended a few meetings, and even helped neighbors repair fences after a storm. But as new board members were elected over the years, the HOA's attitude began to change. Rules became stricter, fines more frequent, and letters more threatening. A small patch of weeds, an off-white paint shade, even a flagpole placement, everything suddenly became a violation. Michael's patience was tested the day he received a violation notice for displaying an American flag on a pole that was supposedly too tall. He contacted the board, expecting a civil conversation, but was met with dismissive remarks and bureaucratic arrogance. The newly appointed HOA president, Gerald Pope, was known for his rigid personality and belief that the HOA's authority extended beyond paperwork. "Rules are rules, Mr. Turner," Pope told him curtly during a phone call. "If everyone starts making exceptions, this community will fall apart." Over the next several months, Michael's name became a regular topic in board meetings. He wasn't a troublemaker, just someone who refused to be intimidated. Neighbors quietly supported him but feared getting involved. He paid one fine after another, even as he appealed them through proper channels. Each appeal was denied. It felt personal now, as if the HOA board wanted to make an example out of him. Still, Michael tried to keep peace. He'd tell his sister over the phone, "It's just a few power-hungry people with clipboards. They'll get tired eventually." But in the back of his mind, unease began to grow. The tone of the letters became sharper, more demanding, and at one point, they warned of further action if he didn't comply. Michael had no idea then that further action would soon mean armed men on his doorstep, wearing fake badges and calling themselves HOA enforcement. His quiet life on Maple Ridge Drive was about to unravel in ways he never could have imagined. It was a blistering July morning when Michael Turner's life took a terrifying turn. The neighborhood was still and sun-soaked when a thunderous pounding on the front door jolted him awake. Groggy and startled, he slipped on his glasses and checked the time, 7:12 a.m. Before he could reach the entryway, a man's voice boomed from outside. "Mr. Turner, this is HOA enforcement. You're in violation of community code and must comply immediately." Michael froze. HOA enforcement? The phrase sounded absurd. Through the peephole, he saw three men in dark tactical uniforms emblazoned with bright yellow patches reading HOA Security Division. One held a clipboard, another had what looked like a stun gun holstered at his belt, and the third, a heavy-set man with sunglasses, was shouting orders into a handheld radio. Michael cracked open the door just an inch. "You've got the wrong idea," he said cautiously. "You can't just barge onto private property." The man with sunglasses stepped forward. "Sir, your property is under inspection for non-compliance. We're authorized by the HOA board to remove unauthorized items and document violations." Before Michael could reply, the men forced their way through the gate along the side yard. The sound of cracking would echoed as one kicked the latch open. They fanned out across the lawn, snapping photos, tugging at his flagpole, and shouting to one another about non-approved modifications. One began unbolting the pole itself, muttering about evidence of defiance. Michael's shock turned to fear. These weren't legitimate officers, just neighbors gone rogue. He dialed 911 with trembling hands. "This is Michael Turner, Maple Ridge Drive. There are armed men pretending to be law enforcement on my property." Within minutes, the shriek of real sirens filled the air. The HOA enforcers froze, their fake authority collapsing in an instant. Two local police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officers emerged with hands on their holsters, shouting for everyone to get down. Confusion and panic erupted as the imposters tried to explain themselves. When questioned, the men claimed they were authorized community officers, acting on behalf of the HOA president, Gerald Pope. But when police checked for credentials, they found none, no badges, no permits, no jurisdiction. Worse, one of the men had a concealed firearm without a license. As the suspects were handcuffed on Michael's front lawn, neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, stunned. A few filmed the spectacle on their phones. Michael stood motionless, his heart pounding as he watched the so-called HOA cops being led away. He had no idea that this bizarre encounter was only the beginning of a much larger scandal, one that would soon unravel the entire HOA board and land several members in federal court. By the time the sun had climbed over the rooftops that morning, Maple Ridge Drive was swarming with flashing lights and curious onlookers. Police cars lined both sides of the street, and the HOA's self-proclaimed security officers sat handcuffed on the curb, their faces pale and stunned. For Michael Turner, it felt like something out of a crime documentary, his own yard transformed into a crime scene. Detective Laura Jennings of the local sheriff's department took the lead. She approached Michael with calm professionalism, clipboard in hand, and asked him to recount what had happened. Michael explained every detail, how the men claimed HOA authority, how they damaged his gate, and how they carried weapons and ordered him to comply. Jennings listened carefully, her brow tightening. "Mr. Turner," she said, "these men aren't law enforcement. And from what you've described, this isn't just trespassing, it's impersonation of an officer, destruction of property, and possibly extortion." Word spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, local news vans arrived, cameras rolling. The headline that evening read, "Fake HOA officers raid homeowner's property, arrested in dramatic standoff." Reporters interviewed neighbors who'd witnessed the raid. Many expressed shock but admitted they weren't entirely surprised. The HOA, they said, had been growing increasingly aggressive, threatening fines, inspecting yards without notice, even photographing properties from drones. Michael's case was simply the first to explode publicly. When police began searching the suspects' vehicles, the story took an even darker turn. Officers uncovered fake ID badges, replica firearms, and printed violation warrants stamped with the HOA logo. It appeared to be an organized operation, not a spontaneous act. Each man carried a laminated enforcement authorization signed by Gerald Pope, the HOA president himself. Detective Jennings obtained a warrant to search the HOA's office. What they found was astonishing: hidden folders labeled non-compliant homeowners, spreadsheets tracking residents who had resisted fines, and emails between Pope and the so-called officers discussing disciplinary inspections. The evidence painted a picture of a power-hungry board acting like a private police force. Michael was asked to submit his security camera footage, which clearly captured the men forcing their way into his yard. That footage became the cornerstone of the investigation. Within a week, the local district attorney filed multiple felony charges against Pope and the three officers. What began as a bizarre morning incident was now front-page news across Arizona. For Michael, the turning point wasn't just about justice, it was about realization. The people he thought were petty bureaucrats had crossed a line into criminality. The HOA wasn't just overreaching, it was abusing power.
In the weeks following the arrests, Michael Turner's quiet street became the epicenter of a scandal that reached far beyond the gates of the Maple Ridge community. The story dominated local headlines, sparking debates about HOA power and accountability. Reporters camped outside Michael's home, camera crews swarmed the courthouse, and online forums lit up with residents from around the country sharing their own horror stories of overreaching homeowners associations. Meanwhile, the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office launched a full-scale investigation into the HOA board. The findings were staggering. Evidence seized from the HOA's office revealed that President Gerald Pope had been funneling community funds into a security initiative that was neither approved by the board nor legally recognized. The money, nearly $80,000 over 2 years, had been used to purchase uniforms, replica firearms, surveillance cameras, and vehicles equipped with flashing lights designed to mimic police cruisers. Prosecutors alleged that Pope and 2 board members, Richard Dale and Kevin Sanders, had created a secret subcommittee they called the Compliance Enforcement Task Force. Their goal was to intimidate non-compliant homeowners into submission through fear and public humiliation. Several residents came forward with stories of late-night inspections, threatening letters, and fines that mysteriously doubled when challenged. Michael's case, however, was the first with hard evidence, footage, physical damage, and armed intrusion. That made it the cornerstone of the state's case. During pretrial hearings, prosecutors presented the security video showing the fake officers tearing through Michael's gate, shouting orders, and carrying unauthorized weapons. The footage silenced the courtroom. Defense attorneys tried to downplay the incident, arguing it was an overzealous enforcement misunderstanding. But detectives testified that Pope had explicitly written in internal emails, "If they won't comply voluntarily, we'll enforce compliance physically." Those words became a devastating blow to the defense. As the case gained traction, federal prosecutors joined in, adding charges of impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy, wire fraud, and misuse of community funds. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 20 years in prison. For Michael, the months of court appearances were emotionally draining. He was subpoenaed multiple times to testify, facing Pope's cold stare across the courtroom. Yet he remained composed, determined to see justice done, not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had been bullied into silence. The trial lasted nearly 6 months. By the end, the jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on nearly every count. The HOA's false sense of power had finally met its reckoning in the eyes of the law.
The sentencing hearing drew a packed courtroom. Dozens of residents from Maple Ridge and neighboring communities filled the benches, waiting to see how justice would unfold. When Judge Elaine Moreno entered the room, silence fell. The verdict had already been delivered, guilty on all major counts, but the final sentencing would determine whether the so-called HOA cops would truly face the consequences of their reckless actions. Michael Turner sat quietly near the front, his posture firm but his expression weary. It had been nearly a year since that terrifying morning when his peace was shattered. He'd relived it countless times through testimony, cross-examinations, and news coverage. Now, finally, he hoped to close that chapter. Judge Moreno read from her notes, her tone measured but sharp. The defendants, Gerald Pope, Richard Dale, and Kevin Sanders, abused their positions of trust, misused community funds, and endangered lives under the guise of authority. This was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate intimidation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as she delivered the sentences. Gerald Pope, 18 years in federal prison for impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Richard Dale, 14 years for aiding and abetting. Kevin Sanders, 12 years for conspiracy and property damage. The fourth man, a hired contractor who'd participated in the raid, received a reduced sentence after cooperating with investigators. When the gavel fell, the weight of the moment settled over everyone present. Michael exhaled deeply, a sense of vindication washing over him, not triumph, but relief. Justice had prevailed. In the months that followed, the Maple Ridge HOA was dissolved under court order. A new neighborhood association was formed, this time with strict transparency rules and oversight from the State Housing Board. Michael was offered a position on the new committee, but he politely declined. "I've fought my fight," he said. "Now I just want peace." He returned to his quiet routines, morning walks, gardening, phone calls with his sister, but life would never be quite the same. Occasionally, reporters reached out for interviews, eager to revisit the HOA cop case that had inspired nationwide discussion about homeowner rights. Michael agreed to a few, only to remind viewers that ordinary citizens must never be afraid to stand up to abuse of power. On a cool spring morning, nearly a year after the sentencing, Michael stood by his freshly painted fence, watching the sunrise over Maple Ridge Drive. The air was still, the neighborhood calm once more. His flagpole stood tall again, unchallenged, gleaming in the light. "All I ever wanted was to live in peace," he told a neighbor softly. Turns out, peace sometimes has to be defended. And with that, Michael Turner's story became more than a local scandal, it became a lasting lesson in courage, accountability, and the quiet strength of standing one's ground.